Chapter 8, Fire Prevention Codes and Ordinances. Our objectives. Describe the relationship between fire and building codes. Identify the different model code organizations. Determine the legal basis for fire code enforcement. Identify the types of fire codes and explain how fire codes are adopted. Explain the legal right that a fire official has to issue warrants, summons, citations, and injunctions. Codes are a set of mandate standards set forth by some sort of professional organization. Ordinances are when a standard is given legal status by a municipality. Some significant fires that shape fire codes and ordinances. Basically, our fire codes and ordinances, I hate to say, are a bit reactive, and that's due to the loss of life from fire throughout history. A lot of our codes and ordinances come from. So, for example, in December 1903, the Airquois Theater in Chicago, Illinois, 602 people died in a fire. Resulting fire codes required that theater doors required to open outward and have clearly marked exits, and the theaters required to conduct fire drills. In November 1942, a very overcrowded Coconut Grove nightclub caught fire, and 492 people died in that fire. And that fire was directly related to combustible decorations of this Hawaiian type theme. Of course, there were exit doors that were chained shut to help keep from people sneaking into the club. When people tried to get out of the structure, the door swung inward, so as more and more people kept pushing on them, they weren't able to pull the doors open, so it led to people getting trampled and the doors getting stuck shut. Revolving doors were also an issue. In 2003, the West Warwick, Rhode Island nightclub, a little bit more of a modern day fire, and that killed 100 people and 230 people were injured. Now, codes must be adopted as ordinances and rigorously enforced. Now, codes, again, are from professional organizations, and codes are recommendations. They do not have the force of law behind them unless they are adopted by a jurisdiction and turned into a code having legal authority. Or, excuse me, not code, turned into an ordinance having legal authority. Building codes are related to building construction, and the standard for fire-resistant building material and interior finishes means of egress, vertical openings, etc. Fire prevention codes focuses on fire safety issues. It is a set standard for fire protection systems and equipment, and it defines what a fire hazard is. Engineering construction should be made to enhance fire safety, such as fixed fire protection systems. The Model Code is a legal standard on construction and fire safety, and it's written, published, and revised by its membership. And the Model Code is a collection of all the initial fire code writing individuals, and they kind of morphed into one. And we'll go a little bit more into the history of this here in a minute. But they basically put out how, or I shouldn't say how, or I should more say what to use to build certain types of structures. So the history of the model code in the United States, as I said, it was a collection of some smaller entities, but let's look at this. It started with the National Board of Fire Underwriters, so essentially, again, the insurance company, which throughout history has kind of helped shape the fire service. They were established in 1866 after a major fire in Portland, Maine. Then they later became the American Insurance Association, AIA, and it was created to standardize rates and find a way to deter arson, was originally their main focus. In 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago was threatened to be closed by the insurance companies because of their electrical hookups. Boston Electric, William Henry Merrill, reviewed the plans and made sure proper safeguards were in place. He formed UL, or Underwriters Electrical Bureau, which would later become Underwriter Laboratories, and UL nowadays plays a pivotal role in fire prevention and testing to ensure safety. The National Board of Fire Underwriters in 1904 issued a standard grading schedule, and standards established the municipality's basic insurance rate. In 1905, they published the National Building Code, which set specific heights and area restrictions and standards for safety features like egresses, fire-resistant construction, and fire protection systems. Another organization that helped doing this, and again, they all morph together at the end, is the Building Official and Code Administration International, or the BOCA. And it was established in 1915. The membership organized that services in the Northeast, Midwest, U.S., and Canada. State and local governments and agencies responsible for code enforcement. They published the first basic building code in 1950. So all these entities were trying to do the right thing by saying, hey, these are the fire protection stuff you should have. This is the type of building construction material you should use. And it was great. But now if you had, say, a builder in Georgia and they were using BOCA and they wanted to go across the line and build something in Alabama, they would probably have to use a different code standard. So it made things a little bit confusing, and you didn't have that ease of access between the different agencies. So with that being said, the International Conference of Building Officials, ICBO, established in 1921, ceased publication in 2003, so they could form one specific entity. They published the Uniform Building Code, and it was primarily used in the Pacific Coast, Rocky Mountain, and Great Plains area. Again, here's a different agency for a different area for the Southeast. Again, they all did basically the same thing, but their wording and maybe their standards were a little bit different, so it made it kind of hard for companies to go and build structures from area to area with any type of consistency. So, in 1994, they all joined together to form the ICC, which is the International Building, Fire, and Property Maintenance Codes. And they started production of their first common book around in 2000, and it's updated periodically through people responsible for construction as well as government entities, manufacturers, things of that nature. So your subject matter experts get together periodically and revamp the standard. Now, as we're familiar, the NFPA is a standard writing organization, and they write a lot of standards for the fire service. Well, they've also had some other things that they dabble in terms of building codes, inspections, and sprinkler systems, such as NFPA 70, which has to do with the electrical code. Another big one that NFPA does is the Life Safety Code, which divides the building occupancies into 16 different classifications and establishes means of egress and standards for each. So we have our different types of building construction, which is a little separate, as we talked about in the last chapter. The occupancy is what is in there, what do they do? And based off of what they do, what they house, will dictate what type of life safety measures, i.e. sprinkler systems, fire doors, etc., need to be in place. So bringing it full circle, we kind of have an idea how these codes come to life. Now it is up to the government to adopt these codes to become ordinances. And once they become ordinances, then they have the force of law behind them. So they can be enforced by the local AHJ or authority having jurisdictions, whether it be, fire marshals, code enforcement, etc. And here's some landmark cases where these ordinances got their teeth in the legal world, where there was a set of precedents saying that, hey, these local communities could hold builders accountable and fine them, jail, etc. As you can see in reading the text, all these different court cases played a pivotal role in going back and forth between local and state rule and who has the authority to do what. Things finally settled down in 1903, 1923, when the courts finally said, hey, the local governments can only have the powers given to them by the state. And then the court reinforced that decision in 1923. Warrantless entries. The state grants powers of code enforcement to local authorities. The local authorities are still bound, however, by the U.S. Constitution that limits their ability to act. In most states, fire prevention codes are applicable to all premises, including single-family dwellings. The Fourth Amendment protects people from having their property searched and would seem to prevent warrantless entry. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that warrantless entry is legal under limited emergency circumstances. Most states recognize that if a building is burning, the right to privacy outweighs the policy powers of the government if it is isolated and no threats to other property or person exists. All model codes contain clauses that outline the right of fire officials to enter a property. Normally, permission is needed from the owner. Fire officials may enter for the purpose of code compliance without a warrant or permission only if a life safety issue is present. So again, if there's some sort of life safety issues as outlined by NFPA that's going on, then they kind of have a foothold to be able to come in and inspect and see what's going on in terms of the greater good. The right of entry to private property is dependent upon the type of model used for inspection priorities. And this goes to the permit model or inspection model. And again, this is going to go more in depth in other classes. But permit model basically has to do with giving someone an occupancy load or certification saying, yep, you're permitted to do this. And inspection is more of an ongoing kind of thing, to put in general terms. Businesses with high potential for loss of life must have a permit to operate, such as nightclubs, restaurants, hazardous material processing, and storage facilities. They must meet certain code requirements before a permit is issued. The inspection model. The inspection schedules should be based on the occupancy categories in terms of classification, such as residential, educational, mercantile, and storage. So each purpose dictates how often things should actually be inspected and looked at. A statute establishes the number of inspections per year based on the type of occupancy. Under what circumstances are unscheduled inspections allowed in the jurisdiction in your area? Think about it. Okay, so let's look at minimum codes versus mini-maxi codes. In some states, minimum codes are adopted by the state and local jurisdiction and cannot have less restrictive requirements. They can implement, however, more strict codes. Under the mini-maxi code concept, local jurisdictions cannot modify any regulations. The code is mandated by the state and enforced statewide. Model codes. The code adoption process is defined by state law, and an effective date for the code must be in the ordinance. So again, this is where the code has the force of law, and this is how it becomes a law. So you take the model code that's put out there, the code is adopted, the process is defined by state law, however they vote or wherever they do. The effective date must be published. The agency responsible for the code must be identified, meaning who's going to enforce it, and they can be adopted by reference or transcription. So whatever identifies the code is what they're saying here. Adopting by reference or transcript. When adopting by reference, the jurisdiction refers to an edition of the model code, like, say, edition 2013, 2014, etc. In adoption by transcript, the entire model code must be published in the adopting ordinance. So that's saying, well, we're not going to pick and choose, but we're going to do the entire text as is. Of course, most codes have a life expectancy of 3 to 5 years before they get looked at again by the publishing agency. All right, prescription or performance-based models. Prescriptive codes establish specific requirements for building and life safety. Fire safety is achieved by mandated requirements for building materials, construction components, means of egress, and fire protection systems. Prescriptive codes, these codes do not identify the fire safety objectives. Your performance codes do not mandate specific materials but rely on quantitative measures to determine fire safety. So that's everything as a whole and not really focusing on, say, the doors have to be 4 hours or whatever the case may be. Code compliance should be verified by laboratories or on-site testing, such as UL in terms of verification. Verification that a technical solution satisfies the performance requirement and is verification by technical experts. The enforcing authority. The administrative section of a model code identifies the enforcing authority and lays out legal framework for the enforcement activity. So basically it says, hey, this is who's going to check, and if you're not compliant, this is their list of retort and what they can do. Documentation. All inspections should be documented. Violations of the code requires a legal notice of violation issued. Notifications must be in writing. Violations must be enumerated in such as the code section cited. So you basically have to lay out verse, title, chapter of where they are not in compliance at, and then the corrective action must clearly be stated in terms of what do you need to do to fix it. So let's look at some legal terms. Some jurisdictions give inspecting authorities the power to issue a summons or a citation. If violations are not corrected, fire officials can request that the court issue an injunction requiring the facility to cease operation until code compliance is met. Okay, again, this is just a brief overview of inspections, code, and ordinances. Actually, we have a couple of classes on that you'll take in your degree or diploma track. Now, summary. The fire service today is not just about emergency service. Fire prevention plays a vital part of the mission. Codes and ordinances are the legal backbone of fire prevention. The ICC has the International Building, Fire, and Property Maintenance Codes. NFPA 5000 Building Construction and Safety Code is another standard used by the fire service. Legal authorities of fire prevention rest in the fire code. It is important for proper documentation to occur when inspecting properties. Okay, gang, if you have any questions, you can email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu or give me a call in the office. Until next time, be safe and have a good day.